Hi, it's time to go over those two shelves right there. So the first book that goes on those shelves on the back side of that top shelf there is called The Miocene Arrow by Sean McMullen. And this is actually the third book in the Great Winter Trilogy. I have the second book right up there at the right there on that shelf above. So I've read the first book and it was okay. But I haven't finished the rest of the series. And the next book is called The Walls of the Universe, which I think is kind of science fiction-y. I believe it's a portal science fiction where a guy's chasing his doppelganger across multiple different worlds, trying to stop him from ruining his life, maybe. Not 100% sure. Got this from somebody at work back when I was in Stuttgart, Germany. And next, we've got a classic by Walter M. Miller Jr., Mechanical for Leibowitz. Everybody that's in science fiction or into science fiction probably knows what this one is. It's basically post-apocalyptic fiction about, I think it's a priesthood that is trying to find the secrets of whatever happened to the world, kind of a thing. Then we've got a book by Larry Niven called Destiny's Road, which is basically about a road that was put on the planet many, many generations before, and apparently people have forgotten what it was for or why it was there. So now somebody's decided to go try to find it, find out why. And we get to another Larry Niven, but this time he's working with Stephen Barnes. This one's called Dream Park. It's basically about a group of people going through like a live role-playing game kind of simulation thing, but then apparently there's a murder that occurs, so they got to figure out who's trying to kill him. It's got a great cover by a guy named Matt Stawicki. So I'm not sure if I've got anything else with him on him, but I'm going to have to look him up after I finish filming this video. So there's that. And then we have something by Andrew Norton and Sherwood Smith. This is called A Mind for Trade. Not 100% sure what it's about, but I think it's a group of different aliens on a ship that are making various merchant trading journeys and adventures that they have. And then we get to Jody Lynn Nye, View from the Imperium. And I think this is probably a comical take on empire building and military sci-fi, maybe, because Jody Lynn Nye basically usually writes funnier stuff. So there's that. And then we get to a 4-book series by Tamara Pierce that I believe is YA fiction, because I've never seen it in adult fiction sections ever. And I picked these up at a yard sale. But this one is called, it's The Song of the Lioness is the series. And this is called Alana, the First Adventure, right there. And then book 2, I think, is In the Hand of the Goddess, right there. And then The Woman Who Rides Like a Man, and Lioness Rampant. So there you go, 4 books there. And then something a lot of people that are familiar with 80s, 70s, and 80s comics might remember seeing in the store. Wendy and Richard Penny wrote the comic ElfQuest, and I guess this is maybe a novelization of some of those adventures, or maybe it's a totally separate thing. I'm not sure. But I could never find ElfQuest as a comic, or could never afford it, or didn't have the money. I don't know. I was always interested in it, but never got to read any of the comics. So one of these days I'll get to this. And then we get to a long, long series by Terry Pratchett, which I'm sure if you know anything about science fiction and fantasy authors, you know that I'm talking about Discworld. So there is The Color of Magic. All these covers are in that style. So here's The Light Fantastic. There's another group of covers. I'm going to look it up after this and probably add them to the video side by side so you can see. But I think they were British versions and they're much more detailed and there's a lot of stuff going on in each cover. And I'll probably add those on this side as opposed to where I'm showing you these on this side. Here is Equal Rights. Mort. Sorcery. Weird Sisters. Pyramids. Guards. Eric. Moving Pictures, name of a really great Rush album too. Don't know if it gets mentioned in here, but one of these days I'll find out when I read it. And then Reaper Man. And finally, Witches Abroad. And a few more from that back shelf. Small Gods. Lords and Ladies. And Men at Arms. I think that's the last one on that back shelf. Then we get to the front part of that shelf and we continue with Discworld, and we've got Soul Music right there. And then Interesting Times. And then Masquerade. And Feet of Clay. Hogfather. Jingo, which is, this one may be one of the few covers of this kind that I like. This one's not bad either. The Last Continent, right there. Carpe Jugulum. The Fifth Elephant, which I think is a play on the movie title The Fifth Element, though I'm not sure if he used any of the scenes in Fifth Element to write a comical version of them or not. Then we get to The Truth. And finally, the last of my 26 Discworld books that I own, Thief of Time, right there. I know there's like 15 or 16 others. One of these days, maybe I'll get to those. I don't know. Then we get to a book that I recall seeing a lot in the bookstores when I was a kid. It was in trade paperback format, and I could definitely not afford it when I was a kid. But sometime in the 90s or early 2000s, I think this came out in this format, mass market paperback, Dragon World by Byron Price and Michael Reeves. One of the reasons I was so interested in it as a kid is because it had illustrations in it like this. which I found. I've said before on some of the other videos that I really like books that have illustrations in them, if the illustrations are any good. So there's that one, and then there's a cool one of somebody's place that they live, I guess. Here we go. This one looks like there's a ship of some sort right there on this side. So anyway, when it came out in mass market paperback, I bought it. Then we get to His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. However, I don't have The Golden Compass because I read it years ago, didn't really like it all that much, and I think I gave it away or loaned it to somebody and never bothered to get it back. But here's book 2, The Subtle Knife, which I still have. Book 3, The Amber Spyglass, which has this illustration in the front part of it there. Mike Resnick is a guy who's pretty well known in science fiction circles. I have the first book of this series upstairs. It's called Santiago. And I read part of it and wasn't really getting into it, but everybody seems to love it after they've finished it. So I don't know. Maybe one of these days I'll get back to reading it. But I also have The Return of Santiago, which is the sequel, I guess. And I got both of these at the Patch Barracks. What's the word? I got both of these at the Patch Barracks thrift store in Stuttgart, Germany when I was there. Then we get to a series by John Ringo and Travis, and eventually John Ringo and Travis Taylor. But the first book was John Ringo. It's called Into the Looking Glass. This is about some portals that open up on Earth, and these aliens come through and they get fought off. And then there's this incredibly powerful energy source that gets found during the conflict, and pretty interesting. This book is entertaining. And then the second book in the series is called Vorpal Blade. So I started to read this one and then got distracted at some point. There's 2 other books in the series that I know of. The third one is called Manxome Foe, and the last one is called Claws That Catch. And if you don't know, I think all of those are lines or phrases from the poem Jabberwocky. So there you go. And then we have a book called Three Unbroken by Chris Roberson. This is part of his Celestial Empire universe. I think this is a standalone, though. I just finished a short story with some characters from that empire. Then we get to a little Joel Rosenberg here, The Guardians of the Flame. I read the first 4 of those, but I don't have those anymore. They were all pretty good. But this is book 5, The Road Home. Book 6, not exactly The Three Musketeers. He starts playing with other famous novels and stories. Not quite Scaramouche, right there. And then not really The Prisoner of Zenda. And that's all I have for the Guardians of the Flame. In the last couple books on that shelf, I got an old Christopher Rowley book here from 1983. So 42 years old, 43 years old. The War for Eternity. No idea what it's about, but it looks like there's an alien involved. And then Christine Catherine Rush's a novel in her Retrieval Artist series. I don't know which number this is. I don't see a list of them in here, but this one's called Extremes. She's a pretty good short story writer. I've never read any of her novels, but if they're as good as her short stories, then this is probably pretty decent. So that's it for the front part of that shelf. Now for the back side of that one, start off with a book called After the Fact by Fred Saberhagen. I think these are about a ship called the Flying Dutchman that can either travel through time or uses wormholes to travel through time. I'm not sure. There's that. The Spear Wielder's Tale by R.A. Salvatore. Book 1, Woods Out Back. Book 2, The Dragon's Dagger. And then book 3, Dragon Slayer's Return, though that's the name of this book because I bought this years ago. Nowadays, I think it has a different title when you look it up on Amazon. If you look up this series, you'll see that book 3 has a different title that seems kind of weird to me. But there's that. And a little more. R.A. Salvatore. This is Echoes of the Fourth Magic. I think this was one of the first things he ever wrote, long before, or maybe shortly before, I don't know, before he created Drizzt Do'Urden and started writing all the Forgotten Realms novels. There's that. And here's book 2 in that series. It's called The Chronicles of Innis Ael, or Aiel. The Chronicles of Innis Aiel. This is book 2, The Witch's Daughter. Book 3, Bastion of Darkness. So there's that. And we get to somebody who's pretty famous nowadays, especially for his Old Man's War series. I've got a lot of his books in e-format, but I think this is the only one I've got in paper copy, and that is The Android's Dream by John Scalzi. And now we come to a book that has been hyped by many, many people, and I'm almost afraid to read it because I'm worried it'll be a letdown or that I won't get it and it'll be a letdown or whatever, but it's Dan Simmons' Hyperion. And then I have the follow-on to that, which is The Fall of Hyperion, which people say just read Hyperion and don't bother with the rest of them. Some people say this book's better than Hyperion. I don't know. I don't have Endymion or Endymion Rising, I think, is the 3rd and 4th book. I don't have either of those, so I won't be reading those unless I read Hyperion and they really knock me out. I'll have to get the other two if that's the case. And here is the first book in Alan Steele's Coyote sequence. And Alan Steele's a really good writer. He writes some great stuff. He doesn't get overly complicated with the sentence structures and everything, and it's just enjoyable fiction and everything. Some of his short stories are great. He writes he's got a lot of tie-ins to this Coyote universe. There's 2 other books in this series, but I don't have either one of them, and I think one of them you can still get an ebook, but I'm not sure about the other, which concerns me because if I really like this book, I may have to try to track down a copy of the other 2. Anyway, I've read a bunch of his Near Earth series, which is like Lunar Descent, Clark County Space, Orbital Decay. All of those are really good books. And they're short too. They're not like 600-page blockbusters. They hover around 300 pages, which makes them really right in a good sweet spot. Then we get to Neil Stephenson, who is well known in science fiction and fantasy circles, and he's well known for writing books that thick, giant doorstops that would kill a chihuahua. And here's one of his earlier books. This one is The Diamond Age, or A Young Lady's Illustrated Primer, or Primer, depending on how you say it. So there's The Diamond Age. And then another cyberpunk guy, I guess. I don't really know if he's classified as cyberpunk. Bruce Sterling with the Zenith Angle. And then we get to somebody who writes some alternate history stuff, but also writes like post-apocalyptic stuff. This one says it's a novel of alternate history. It's called Conquistador. And then we get to the first of his novels of the change, and this one's called Dies the Fire. I think there's at least 4 other novels in this series, probably more. I've never read any of them, but what I have read of S.M. Sterling, he's a pretty good writer, so one of these days I'll get to those. And then another guy that's talked about a lot these days, especially when he puts out a new book, Charles Stross. This is Glass House. I don't know if this is one of his more famous ones. This is an earlier book of his, but he's written a lot of fiction. The Laundry Files comes to mind as one of his more popular series. So he's written a lot of books in that series. And then we get to Judith Tarr, Kings and Goddesses. Looks like we got some ancient Egypt stuff going on here. It says it looks like it's about Queen Hatshepsut. Yeah, so. And here's another one where a woman gets thrown back in time to, I think it's Caesar's Rome. I'm not sure if it's Caesar, but it's Rome for sure. This one's called Household Gods. She gets thrown back to the Roman frontier in 170 AD. Then we get to a whole bunch of Harry Turtledove, starting on that shelf. Ruled Britannia right there. I think this takes place in Shakespeare's day. And then Liberating Atlantis. I mainly bought that because the word Atlantis is in the title. I don't even remember what it's about, but it sounded interesting. Then we get one where the South won the Civil War, the Guns of the South, or at least had a better chance of winning the Civil War. I'm not sure. Another one about the Civil War, How Few Remain. And then we get the first of the Great War series. This is American Front. And I believe this is an alternate World War I where America is split because of the Civil War. I think the map's inside. Yeah, if you look at the map inside, you can see down here you've got the Confederate States of America and then the United States up above that. So I don't know how that plays into the story, but that's what this series is based on. Now for the front part of that, we continue with the Great War. This one is book 2, Walk in Hell. Breakthroughs, book 3 in that series. Now we get to the American Empire series, which starts off with Blood and Iron, and then The Center Cannot Hold, right there. And then finally, The Victorious Opposition. I'm not sure if those books will lead into the next set of books or if they're all completely separate or not. But we get to his World War II series, which starts off with In the Balance. I think the premise of this one is that World War II's in full force, and then some aliens arrive and start joining the battles or start really messing up everybody's plans or whatever and want to take over Earth. I'm not 100% sure, but then we get book 2, Tilting the Balance, and book 3, Upsetting the Balance, and book 4, Striking the Balance. You can see a nuclear bomb going off in the background of that one. Then the last 3 turtle doves I have, which are a continuation of that world, we've got Colonization, Second Contact. You can see there Heinrich Himmler must have survived World War II because that's him there in the middle of the picture. And then Colonization, Down to Earth. Looks like JFK. I'm not sure who the other guy is, but got that there. And then Colonization, Aftershocks. So then we get to a classic sci-fi that everybody either raves about or bounces off of completely. I'm of the latter camp. Werner Vinge's A Fire Upon the Deep. I don't know. This felt slow to me, and I didn't get that much into it. You know, it was a bit confusing to me too. So maybe I just didn't give enough time. I don't know. Then we get to Margaret Weis's Star of the Guardian series. And I've got 7 of these. We've got volume 1, The Lost King. Somebody told me these were basically Star Wars because, like you can see here, she's holding a sword that looks like a lightsaber, kind of. And then King's Test. And the 3rd one in the original trilogy, King's Sacrifice, right there. And then Ghost Legion, the 4th of those. Then she added a second author, a guy named Don Perrin. So this is Margaret Weiss and Don Perrin, The Knights of the Black Earth. I'm not sure if this is Star of the Guardians or not. There's that. Then we get Robot Blues right there. And then Hung Out. That's the last of these that I have. And then the final book on that shelf is called Death of the Necromancer by Martha Wells. And everybody knows Martha Wells because of Murderbot these days. I read Murderbot. It was okay. I have a bunch of the others that I haven't gotten to. But this is Death of the Necromancer. This is a pretty old copy. I think this was recently re-released. And this one has this art in the front that you can see there. It's pretty cool. So you can see the guy and the girl kind of fleeing from whatever these guys are doing, these dragons and demons and stuff. So anyway, that's it for that shelf. So this is the 5th video I've done doing these bookshelf tours. And I also did a Star Wars one covering those books up there. So I hope you like some of these, seeing some of these old books that I've got. If you're wondering why some of them are so old, the main reason is because back in probably 2008 or 2009, I started buying things as ebooks mostly. I still like having a physical book in my hand when I can, but I also moved to Europe a few years later, and I don't, it's not as easy to get them here without paying way too much for books that you're not sure you're even going to like. So I don't order physical books for the most part. Anyway, if you got any comments or suggestions about the channel or this video or anything else that you want to say about books in general, put them in the comments down below, and bye for now.